It is disappointing, I must say, very, very disappointing, because Chris Hani was an iconic figure in our struggle. And in fact, if you look at it more carefully, it was our democracy in the end, as we even attained an election date, was pivoted on the tragedy that our country went through when Chris Hani was killed. So you could say that Chris Hani's death was part of what spawned the democracy that we have, and it is unfortunate. But I haven't looked at the judgment closely myself. I would like to do so and to see the reasoning. And one cannot but feel the pain that the family and his widow, Dimpho Hani, is going through.
South Africa's unresolved, painful past continues to be a blight on today's constitutional democracy. This aptly demonstrated by the fierce reaction to last week's Constitutional Court judgment granting Chris Hani's killer, Janusz Walusz, parole after many years of opposition by the family and those who believe he doesn't deserve it, including the state. I'm Aldrin St-Pierre, and this is Unfiltered. Welcome. This week, Walusz could walk out of jail. At the core of his release is a dispute over the equal rights apartheid perpetrators enjoy in our constitutional democracy versus the rights and sense of justice for their victims and their families. Tonight we ask, do the rights of apartheid-era perpetrators matter? If so, where should the law strike the balance between their rights and the rights of the victims? Joining this debate on Twitter, you can go on to our Twitter handle there is Unfiltered, or rather go to Facebook as well and search for Unfiltered SABC. As we discuss, we are joining in studio by Imtiaz Kajia, nephew of a murdered anti-apartheid activist Ahmed Timmel, Pete Du Plessis, former attorney of ex-CCB operative Freddie Bernard, and on Zoom we are joined by former TRC Commissioner Mary Barton. Mary, let's start off the conversation with you. Do the rights of apartheid perpetrators matter? Good evening.
Good evening, Alvin, and good evening, everybody else, and to the listeners. Thank you for having me on this very important and difficult discussion, as we are surrounded and filled with memories of the day on which Chris Hani was assassinated. I think nobody who was around at the time can forget about it. And the huge risk that the whole country had of falling backwards into ongoing strife and anger that could have happened as a result, which is exactly what Janusz Walusz was intending to happen. So there is no doubt in my mind that it was a terrible act, and there is no doubt in my mind that the suffering of the family and the millions of people who admired and followed Chris Hani continue to feel. However, I do also believe that if Chris Hani were alive today, he would be deeply grieved by some of the things that he sees wrong in our society. The poverty, the homelessness, the crime, the corruption. But he would greatly celebrate the Constitution and the rights that are guaranteed to all the people of South Africa. So I think that if one thinks of it from that point of view, it's our duty to defend our Constitution and to uphold the rights that were won at such great cost. And those rights have to apply to everybody. So I would like to say that I think we need to support the President of the Constitutional Court in this judgment, however difficult and hard it is to take. Mm-hmm. And just in terms of more general apartheid perpetrators, one of the problems that we have is that when they were offered the opportunity for amnesty, they didn't even apply for it. Or if they did apply for it and didn't tell the full truth, they may have been denied it. And yet those people have never been brought to court. So we have to have a system where everybody is treated in the same way by the same laws.
Mm-hmm. A bit your take on that question that we're asking this evening: do the rights of former apartheid perpetrators matter? And also considering the issue that's raised now around an opportunity that was granted to come clean, would you say that your client came clean at the TRC?
Yes, Alderman, let me say this. Firstly, the rights of those people, in fact, do matter. It matters because your rights matter. My rights matter. Everyone's rights matter. So if you cannot distinguish between the rights of different groups, different people, the moment you do that, you are not applying the Constitution, our hard-fought-for Constitution, and our constitutional dispensation. And I have read the judgment by the Chief Justice on and I think it's a masterpiece of rational thinking. And we can be rightly proud of a judgment like that. It's world-class. Now, having said that, you referred to the apartheid operatives. I must just make it clear, I have no brief on their behalf. I defended them, or some of them, years and years ago, and also represented them during the TRC sessions. Now, whether they came clean or not is obviously the record is there for anyone to decide. They said they did come clean. Some of them did not get amnesty for some of the deeds perpetrated by them. But there was the opportunity by the state to then prosecute them. Yep. But the state didn't do that. And many of those crimes have prescribed. They cannot be blamed for this. So, yes, in short, their rights matter, okay, and that law was purely applied by the Chief Justice in the Wallis matter.
Imtiaz, your take on this, also considering the point that Piet now raises, that it is the state that didn't pursue some of these prosecutions?
Alderman, we have to go back to the preamble of the Constitution, which is very clear. We, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustice of the past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, unquote. Now, what does this mean almost 3 decades later? Yes, everybody's got rights, but what about the rights of victims? Our Constitution was developed during a particular period and era where there were negotiations taking place in the country to end the decades of conflict. Mm-hmm. And we as victims reached out to perpetrators and saying, look, come forward, make full disclosures. And what transpired? In the Timor matter in 1996, João Rodrigues was given an opportunity to come forward. The TRC failed to subpoena him. All his generals and his commanders that were working with him were not even subpoenaed. They did not even come forward to apply for amnesty in the Timor matter in 1996. So we need to go back, look at the negotiations process, look at the secret agreements that were made between the ANC and Nationalist Party. This is based on legal arguments presented by João Rodrigues' legal counsel, that there was informal agreement, there were secret amnesty deals. And you know, for the president to stand up today and say he's disappointed, the question that families have got, Alderman, more than 3 decades later, is what has this ANC-led government done since 2003, when the final TRC reports were handed over to the National Prosecuting Authority to investigate these particular crimes? That is a question that must be asked. And for me, it's very simple. You cannot come 3 decades later and ask, but who? We are in the dark regarding the investigation.
But as Piet then raises the point that it is the state that didn't pursue those cases. And we know from the Supreme Court of Appeal case as well on this matter is that the NPA said that then President Thabo Mbeki said, don't pursue these prosecutions.
No, most certainly. And that's why the onus must be on the state. Because there was a TRC process, and my investigations and my research clearly indicates, and this is what has come out from the Rodrigues legal counsel, that there was a secret amnesty deal there was an agreement made between the various political parties that nobody will be prosecuted. So this entire thing, in my view, with the greatest of respect to many people that appeared before the TRC, the conclusion that I come to that the TRC was a theater.
Okay. When we come back, I just want to go back to that conversation, but also ask it in a different way that says that if the opportunity is being granted to say to the perpetrators, come forward, speak to the victims, speak to their families, and come clean, why haven't they taken that up? That conversation when we come back. And welcome back to Unfiltered. We're asking this evening, do the rights of apartheid perpetrators matter? Joining us for this conversation this evening is Imtiaz Kaji, who is the nephew of murdered anti-apartheid activist Ahmed Timol, as well as Piet du Plessis, former attorney for ex-CCB operative Ferdy Bynand, as well as former TRC Commissioner Mary Button, who is joining us via Zoom. Piet, let's go back to the point that you raised earlier on around, in any case, some of these crimes have already prescribed. What do you mean by that?
Well, the state, I would say all the crimes of which I know about relating to clients I represented already prescribed because of the 20-year period which went by. So since the commission of the crime. So they can simply not be prosecuted.
But there
for
are
those.
some exceptions, right?
Yes, well, obviously in the case of, for instance, murder, it wouldn't prescribe. But there were no charges of murder involved in the matters I'm talking about. Barnard is something different. He was charged and prosecuted for the murder of Dr. David Webster.
Yeah.
So, and he was convicted, and he served his sentence and was released on parole. I may just say I have no mandate to speak on his behalf, and I wasn't involved with his parole procedure. But yes, he served his sentence, and he was properly and legally, lawfully released on parole.
Yeah. And when it comes to the crimes that were allegedly perpetrated by, let's say, maybe some of your clients, do you think that there's an obligation on their behalf to reach out to the so-called victims and speak about what had happened, to give them some sort of solace?
Yes, well, look, it's difficult for me to say. Those are personal issues, it's not legal issues. We represented them in front of the TRC, where they had the opportunity to express their remorse, in which they did. Even though some of them didn't get amnesty for some of the crimes perpetrated by them. So I simply think that I can't always blame the government or the process, but perhaps not enough was done to facilitate that kind of situation. But to now go back, with all due respect to Imtiaz and the feelings of the family of the victims, we are now trying to go back 20, 30 years in history. And the question is whether this is the correct stance to take.
Would you say no to that?
Look at the reopened inquest. The Timol, the Agate, the Dipali, the Hefiji, the Haron matter. All the security police that were involved in these acts never came forward on their own. They were all subpoenaed to testify. All of them stuck to their narratives which they had presented during the apartheid era inquest.
Yeah.
So the question is, what else are we supposed to be doing as families? We continue reaching out, and it's not a sign of weakness. We're asking them, as Pete has clearly articulated, that the Torture Act is prescribed. So what is stopping them from coming forward and making full disclosures? And for me, sorry, Aldrin, the conclusion that I come to is that there are many things of the past that many don't want to come forward on all sides of the political party.
Mary, do you think that there is space for that to actually happen?
This is many, many years have gone by since the amnesty provisions were laid down. And one has to balance against them also the hope that we would get the truth and the ability also to give something in the way of reparations to the people who suffered so much. So many, many years have been wasted in taking up those compromise opportunities which were entered into so that we might move into a phase of peace. People didn't come forward. People didn't tell the full truth. They wriggled and squiggled and tried not to tell any more than they absolutely had to. Many people didn't take the opportunity at all to approach the Truth Commission. So the chances were missed in many ways, but it's still not too late. We still need to try and pursue the truth where we can find it. We need to work hard to deal with the unpaid reparations to so many thousands of people. Not that reparations make a difference in living terms, because it's not a very large amount, especially now after all those years, but it's the acknowledgement, the official acknowledgement by the state of what was done under previous governments, yes, but still in the role of the state. It was the responsibility of the state to take on all this suffering and try and find a way to deal with it. I don't think it's a question of whether things are prescribed or not, because we still need the truth. We still need to expose what happened, why it happened, who gave the orders. And at the same time, we need to work hard on trying to fulfill the task of using the money that is still waiting there in the government's coffers to give reparations to those who earned them through their suffering.
Yeah. Let me just quickly read a passage from the judgment that was handed down last week by the Constitutional Court. In weighing the history of administrative decisions making on Wallace's repeated attempts to secure parole, he was deeply mindful of the severity of the crime and the calamity it nearly caused, but also the fact that those who drafted the Constitution, adopted a few years later, intended all and not just those who supported the transition to enjoy the fundamental rights that are within the Constitution. Kaji, do you think that there's a contradiction at all?
Well, it comes back to, again, how the law was developed and how the law is applied. And from a family's perspective, these are the questions that we continue asking. The preamble states it very, very clearly. And yet we find more than 3 decades later, families have got to continue on their own pursuits to find truth and justice. And that is why it's shocking for me for the president to say he's disappointed. The question is, what have they done for almost 3 decades to ensure that the likes of Janus Vanus never see freedom in their lifetime?
Yeah.
And to come back 3 decades later and to say we're disappointed. And the reality is that there's been a concerted effort from all parties to make sure that we as families don't pursue these matters. That is the conclusion that I come to.
And probably something that needs to be unearthed as well. We continue the conversation when we come back, and also looking into the future. We'd love to hear from you. You can tweet at Aldrin St-Pierre, tweet at Unfiltered SABC as well, so that we can engage on this conversation. And welcome back as we get some closing remarks from our panelists this evening. Pete, let's start off with you. I remember interviewing F.W. de Klerk, the former president, and one of the things that he mentioned was once the decision was taken to go into negotiations, he was told that he was a sellout by party members as well. And I wonder for your clients and the ones who are released, have they ever expressed something similar at all?
Yes, I think it stands to reason if you look back at what F.W. de Klerk said. The same was experienced by many of the operatives. So one must have sympathy with them and the courage they had to stand up, and specifically de Klerk, to call time on apartheid and start negotiations. Mm-hmm. But let me say this, that one mustn't make the mistake to think that the judgment by Judge Zondo expresses any form of sympathy or obviously no support for what Mr. Wallus did. And it remains, and he makes it very clear, it's one of the most atrocious murders which ever happened, and the intention was to kill thousands of people.
And plunge us into a civil war.
And plunge us into a civil war. That we mustn't forget. But that is why this judgment is so exceptional, in that the judge could divorce his mind from the individual and apply the law purely.
Mary, in a couple of seconds, some closing remarks on your end on how to go forward.
I find myself thinking very much about Chris Hani himself. What would he think? He would be 80 years old now. And Joe Slovo said of him, Chris Hani had a dream of democracy. They killed the man, but they can never kill the dream. And so I believe that that dream is still important to protect and preserve, to have the kind of society that Chris Hani lived and worked for all his life.
Thank you so much. Kaji?
History will judge those comrades who have held political power as to what is it that they've done to find truth and justice for the comrades who have died in their trenches.
Imtiaz, thank you so much for your time. Pete, as well as Mary, really appreciate your time this evening. And thank you so much for choosing us this evening on Unfiltered with me, Aldrin St-Pierre, right here on S3. We're back again next week, Monday, same time, same place. Totsiens. Enjoy the rest of your evening.